Hey everyone, before we get into our interview with Sarah Smith for Congress, I have some bad news. I recently purchased a fancy new microphone to improve the sound quality from my end. Due to a setting I didn't test out enough, the audio from the interview had to be tweaked. This made it not sync up with the video. So I had to choose between really bad audio or out of sync video. Instead, I picked a still shot with fixed audio. I always prefer to leave interviews as unedited as possible, as it keeps everyone honest. This time, however, it had to be done. So my apologies in advance. The content you are about to hear was too important to scrap, try and redo, or have presented with bad audio. Despite this, I hope you enjoy. I hope it leaves you more informed, and I hope you can share this with others. Thank you for your patience. Hey everybody, welcome to the Next Uprising podcast. Today we have been honored with our second interview, Sarah Smith. Now, Sarah, I think we need to start out why don't you tell everyone what inspired you to run for office and how did this begin for you?
So the inspiration to run for office and how it began kind of go hand in hand. So I have always been pretty active, especially in politics. I have done things like voter drives. I helped organize sit-ins and walkouts when I was in high school. I've been volunteering actively all the way through college up till now. So I've always been pretty active in my community. Not as active as I could have been, but that comes at the price of having to work a job and pay bills and things like that, unfortunately. So I really, after the November election last year, I really wanted to do more, especially with Bernie Sanders having been the very first presidential campaign I donated to. It really inspired a lot. It was a politician that was telling me, I get it. And it was someone that was speaking a message that resonated with me. And it really inspired me to get more involved, especially when Bernie had his call to action and get people involved and go run for office. And I was like, perfect, let me see what I can do. So I dove in, I got more involved with my local district Democrats, and then I started volunteering with Brand New Congress. So I found Brand New Congress, and then I started doing some side volunteer work with them. I was really excited about it. I was trying to find, people in my life that I thought would be good, who I could nominate. And then I got a call that someone had nominated me. And I've been talking about running for office for something. I looked at city council, I was looking at school boards, I was looking at state house and things like that. And after some back and forth for a few months, they asked if I would be amenable to running for Congress in Washington's 9th District. And I did some of my research into the district, and I felt it would be a really strong district, or it should be a really strong district. It should be a really strong progressive district, but we were lacking that in our representation. So we have a reputation for being really progressive, but our representative doesn't. And so I decided that, now's a good time for some kind of change. I want to be an agent of change. I really want to get involved. Someone in my community nominated me to do it. So they had enough faith in me that they think I could do this. And I decided, why not put my feet in the fire, throw my name in the hat. And I said, let's do this. Let's run for Congress. And ever since we've had our feet on the pavement since that conversation.
All right. Now, you were recently denied voter data from Washington State Democrats. And I believe it was a post about that actually brought your campaign to my attention. So has that been resolved, and what can people do to help you out with that?
So it still hasn't been resolved. What's happening is they've been playing a little bit of a hair-splitting game. The state party has, and the state party has said, well, you're not being denied access, but they're sending me on an impossible scavenger hunt. So basically, what they told me is there's a bylaw that says in order for me to gain access to VAN, I have to have the endorsement of 50% plus one of the legislative districts and the approval of the state party chair. And I learned a lot recently about how those endorsement processes work. So some legislative districts don't endorse at all, and most legislative districts won't start their endorsement processes until April or May. So for a grassroots campaign like this, I have to wait till almost the primary to even get the data I need to start becoming a strong contender for this district. So in order to win the election, I have to win the election, which is essentially what I was told. It has not been resolved. Our campaign has been reaching out continuously to the state party office, to our state party chair, Tina Podlodowski's office. I've been trying to get emails back and forth with them. What I'm trying to get is I have a lot of experience in the legal realm, and I love when things are written down. Things being written down is my favorite thing. So I really want to see the bylaw because it helps me understand, okay, this is what they mean, and just make sure that the language is correct and see if there's something I'm misinterpreting or something like that I could do differently. So I just want the language for the bylaw. And I think we're entering our third week of asking for the language in the bylaw, and no one is giving it to us. They're actually no longer responding to our campaign. But I have to say, as frustrating as it is and as disappointing as it is, because that's really what's going on. I'm pretty disappointed with the state party more than anything. But as disappointing as it's been, the legislative districts and the county boards have stepped up. They are really coalescing around this issue. A lot of people didn't know this bylaw existed. And then as the story broke, I actually found out that there have been a lot of people that have gone through something like this. So there are a lot of candidates, both in down ballot races, in city council races, even in congressional races, who have had this bylaw pulled out on them at the beginning. And it's been really frustrating. A lot of them haven't had the kind of platform that I have to be able to talk about it. So I'm trying to do as much as I can to bring those stories to light and show this is a systemic issue with our state party, and as progressive a state as we want to be, until we do something about this bylaw, which is being both applied unevenly and randomly, and no one can point out this bylaw or find the language anywhere, until we do something about it, we're going to constantly have these hamstrung challengers to incumbents. I mean, primary challenges, especially in the Democratic Party, are a good thing. We should be embracing fresh faces. We should be embracing fresh blood in these seats. We should be open to the fact that if someone is a registered Democrat, they are and they're a dues-paying member of the Democratic Party, registered longtime Democrat, they should be as entitled to this voter data as anybody, as any sitting congressman. This is the kind of data that all Democrats should be able to access. The party shouldn't be able to funnel it and chokehold it wherever they want to hold on to power. So we've had a lot of conversations with a lot of the county representatives. We talked with one county that's actually working on a formal reprimand for our state party chair, and they're calling for the language of this bylaw to be released, so the written down language of this bylaw to be released. There's another county that's been calling every single day. They've had teams of people that are calling. Some of the legislative districts have started working on resolutions to uncouple endorsements from election tools and things like that. So since the story broke, while I'm still frustrated dealing with the state party, at a local level, they've really, really stepped it up, and it has just been amazing. People didn't know about this. They had never heard this kind of thing before. So I've shed a lot of light on what has otherwise been a kind of a foggy area. And it's been really, really good. And I think the long-term effects of this are going to be really positive for working towards better transparency with the state party, better transparency with the legislative districts, and more open, free, and fair elections in our state, which if any state should have free and fair elections, it's probably Washington. So.
All right. Now, as you said, this was the Bernie Sanders was the first candidate you ever actually donated to, and I am the same way. I've never had a political sign out in my front lawn before. Bernie Sanders was the first one that I put out there. So we have a massive chunk of people that are just starting to pay attention beyond just voting, many that just started voting. And so I think we probably need to follow up with this question. The election just ended, but you and Iron Stash and a few others seem to be just getting started on your campaigns. How do you explain to people why that is?
So the easiest way to explain it is we're really grassroots level campaigns. So my campaign doesn't take any special interest money, any corporate money or anything like that, which means that the way that we go about campaigning has to be different. We want to be in the grassroots, right? We want to be talking to people, engaging with voters. So we actually started back in June. We've actually been canvassing pretty regularly, doing phone banking, attending events, things like that, getting our names out there, because we're dealing with campaigns in a totally different way. So we're actually trying to go meet voters where they're at and go talk to them. We have a lot of momentum to build behind our campaigns, because a lot of us, especially running with Justice Democrats and Brandon Congress, have never held political office or are not politicians or never set out to be politicians, myself included. So we have a lot of building to do. So we're trying to get involved as early as we can, get our hands in as early as we can, start building that momentum behind our campaign, start getting boots on the ground. And to do that, because we're going against a lot of big money, a lot of our incumbents we're challenging have very huge war chests. Alex Ocasio-Cortez over in New York's 14 is challenging Representative Joe Crowley, who's got something like $3 million in his war chest. So we're going up against these guys with big bank accounts and big donors, and so we have to start earlier, because we're the little guy. We have to get out there and knock doors and meet people. But it's been really effective and really good. We've all been running really strong social media campaigns, trying to meet people where they're at, on their phones, at their doors, wherever we can get to people. It's where we're trying to meet them. And so the way we have to do that is we have to start earlier than a lot of the incumbents are going to be able to.
I got to say, I think that there is no better idea, and there's no idea we need to sell harder than progressives getting started earlier, because that's I think our
Hmm.
biggest weakness is we're not starting early enough. So just to be clear to people, this is the next thing. We don't get to take a break. We don't get to stop, because when you're trying to overhaul such a corrupt system, it's going to take never taking a break. And as soon as one election ends, we need to get started immediately on the other one. So now progressive just won a ton of battles in the election that just ended.
Hmm.
How do we keep the left from thinking that the fight is over and we won?
We kind of just have to show this is a marathon. This is not a sprint. One election that we've been successful at, I know we did a lot of work in Virginia, especially Our Revolution and Democratic Socialists of America. They were the ones that really won those elections, as RREV and DSA. They really put their nose to the grindstone. A lot of those candidates ran without establishment help, but they achieved a lot over there in Virginia. But that's just one state. And we have a whole lot more states that we still have to change. The fight is not over. It is just beginning. Just like Eastern and Western time, there's a 3-hour time difference, right? So it's the wave is kind of coming our direction, and we have an opportunity in 2018 to keep that sweep going. But the reality is, until we have progressives sitting in as many seats as we possibly can, we can't stop. We have to keep going. And that includes school boards, that includes city councils, that includes state house, state legislature, state senate, that includes as many progressives as we can put in as many offices as possible. Progressive judges, progressive attorney generals, progressive governors, as many as we can get in as many seats as possible. And this is a long game. So you have sitting senators have 6-year terms. So if your progressive candidate doesn't win that first round, that's okay. They just have to mourn for a day, get up, brush themselves off, and keep going and start again, because it kind of ties back to the whole starting earlier thing. So the more we keep going and the more we keep fighting until we get those progressives in those seats, we cannot just stop, because complacency was part of the problem, right? Being content, being complacent, no longer fighting, thinking everything's going to be fine. Everyone thought that, Hillary was going to win in a landslide, and she really did not. So we can't let ourselves be complacent. We did that once, and it bit us in the end. And so we have to make sure that we're not allowing ourselves or future generations to do that after us.
Okay, now your opponent is Adam Smith. What's the one thing you have to offer voters that your opponent does not have?
Adam Smith, no relation. I am the staunchly anti-war candidate. So Adam is very comfortable with the war industry. He's actually the third highest Democratic House recipient of PAC money in the entire Democratic Party. And a lot of his donors, I think over 35% of his donors, are from the war industry. And coincidentally, he's always voted very favorably towards the war industry. He's voted consistently to increase the military budget. He just did it again. So they had the initial Appropriations Act, or the initial budget authorization, where they put $72 billion more into the military budget than Trump was asking for. And since they've done that, they've gone back and revised the budget, and it's now even more than that. So it's now over $700 billion. And he voted in favor of that. And he's consistently voting in favor of things that benefit the military. He won't get behind the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, but he voted in favor of selling cluster bombs to the Saudi Arabians. He voted in favor of the Iraq War, of the Patriot Act. So he's very comfortable with the war industry. And I happen to think that the way our military spending is going is out of control, to the point that it's sacrificing things like education, Social Security. It's sacrificing social programs, things that people really need and rely on right now, that we can't be constantly increasing that budget. We need to be fighting to audit the military. And that's something that I have said from day one, is we need to audit the military, the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, because they've never been audited, despite promising for the last 30 years that they'd give us the results of an audit. They've lost $6.9 trillion in the last, I think, 10 years. It's getting out of hand, and he won't put his foot down, because that's where his big donors are. It all comes back to the money. They give him a lot of money to run his campaigns. And so that's the thing I have to offer people. I'm not beholden to special interests. I can put my foot down. I can say no to the war industry. I can say no to expanding more of these unauthorized wars. I can fight against the authorized use of military force, because I'm not beholden to anybody but the people. My donations are only from individual people. It's not from businesses, because that's not who I want to represent, right? The goal is to represent people, so I'm going to take money from who I want to represent. And so not having those ties allows me to do things that he can't right now.
Okay, now by far we do spend more on military than any other country, yet our veterans are left out in the cold way too often. How important is it to you that we direct more of that massive budget to taking better care of our military vets and families?
so very important. Right now, we're paying at, I think a conservative estimate says that of, let's just use the most recent number I've got, which is $700 billion. Of that $700 billion, at least 60% goes to private military contractors, which means 60% is not going into our troops. It's not going to our veterans. It's not going to our Department of Defense facilities. It's going to private businesses like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, like Boeing, like Raytheon. And these companies are posting record profits. So they're making money off of the fact that we're giving them billions and billions of dollars. And I think that one of the crucial changes we need to make is stop giving contractors that money. We need to stop working with contractors, because this is ridiculous. We have all the talent in the world in our troops. Those billions of dollars can go to things like veterans programs. They can go to things like rehabilitative programs, to helping veterans deal with things like PTSD. I mean, Bernie said it, and I'll say it until my last breath, which is, if we can't take care of our veterans, then we can't send them to war. And that's the reality of the situation. If you cannot care for them when they come home, then you cannot care for them when they're abroad. And so we need to stop sending them out there. And if we stop paying contractors 60% of our military budget, we'll actually have the funding to be able to put into the VA, to be able to put into job programs, to actually provide tangible help to veterans. And that, I think, is a crucial change that we need to make if we want to survive.
Okay, now you recently supported the resolution declaring U.S. military role in Yemen's civil war unauthorized. First off, how I know that whole situation is way above the heads of probably most of the people that are going to watch this video. So how would you explain why that's important and why we were there in the first place?
So this is a very complicated issue. I had someone mention to me in passing, they said, what are your feelings on what's going on in Yemen? And I realized I knew tertiary what was going on, that we were over there, but I didn't really know too much. So I actually sat down and I was like, let's find out what's going on in Yemen. And essentially what's happening is, while we're not directly involved in any kind of civil war over there, we're not involved in any kind of occupation with the Saudis, we are providing support to the Saudi Arabian government. We are providing arms, we're providing weaponry, we're providing the Saudi Arabians all the tools to essentially go and attack the Yemeni people. But the problem is, Yemen is a starving nation. It's in the middle of a drought. It's in the middle of a famine. These people are starving. They're extremely poor. And on top of that, the Saudi Arabians are now coming in and attacking them and bombing them and hurting them. And what this is doing is, it's kind of part and parcel in the Middle East, because you've got all these people that are downtrodden and beaten down and are starving and are just trying to survive, being mowed down by another nation that essentially just wants their land for oil. You're seeing these terrorist groups like ISIS and Hamas come in and start recruiting very effectively in these areas. And we're helping to propagate that issue. We're helping prop up those problems. And that's part of the issue with our whole involvement in the Middle East, is the more destructive we get and the more we help destroy, the more we're helping these terrorist groups build up their ranks. And that's what's going on in Yemen. So we're not the ones pushing the button, but we're the ones that are showing the button to the Saudi Arabians and letting them push it and saying it's different. One of the reasons this is such a big problem is because the way that the authorized use of military force in 2001, I believe it was written, is what's going on in Yemen is not included in that scope. So basically, the president was given the ability to declare war and occupations and send troops around wherever without the need for Congress to formally declare war, which is why the authorized use of military force, especially under President Trump, is such a big deal, because this guy's got his finger on the button and we have no way to stop him. So all of the stuff going on in Yemen it's not covered under the scope of the authorized use of military force. But Congress also isn't doing anything to stop him from getting us involved over there. Isn't doing anything from stopping our generals from sending us over there. It's not doing no one's doing anything. And so Justice Democrat Ro Khanna put forth this resolution and said, absolutely not. We're putting our foot down. This is outside the scope of the authorized use of military force. This is not the conflict we need to be involved in. It's unhumanitarian for us to be over there helping attack starving people, essentially. And he basically said, absolutely not. This is not okay. So Ro Khanna put forth the resolution to pull us out of Yemen and stop us being involved in any way, shape, or form with the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And I have been talking about this since he actually put it forward back in September. And I've been hammering away at my representative. I've been talking about what a big deal it is, how important this is. And finally, I just called on my representative directly, because I sit there and every day I check the same few bills, and I checked the Resolution 81, and I'd never see his name. So I was starting to get frustrated. And I finally I put out a call to action, and I said, I'm calling on you to co-sign this. As someone that sits in the same committee as Ro Khanna, as the ranking member of that committee, you should be on the forefront of this bill. Where are you? Co-sign this bill. I had a few volunteers that called his office. I called his office. One of them sent an email over to him, and the next day, my representative actually turned around and co-signed the bill. But it was after pressure from me, after pressure from my volunteers, from our whole campaign, that he turned around and signed it. But this resolution, as boring and long and drawn out as that explanation was of what's going on over there, this resolution is really important because it's one of those first steps that seems dry and boring, but it's such a big deal to regaining the ability of Congress to declare war, because that's really what we want to do, right? We're involved in several different unauthorized actions around the world, and we really want to start reining those in. And one of the best ways to do that is to start chipping away at the authorized use of military force, hold the government accountable for what they're able to do and not do, especially when they're starting on the camp of things that they're not supposed to be doing with the use of military force.
Now, I myself am a loud and proud card-carrying member of the Teamsters Union, and unions are being weakened more and more every day. How important do you feel unions are to the strength of our country, and why are they so important to the backbone of the United States?
Unions are so crucial to, especially if you can't talk about the middle class and not talk about strong unions. You can't. They're inseparable. You have to have them together. Unions create a strong middle class, and they've been painted as this boogeyman by these big businesses, because they're like, look, they're taking your money and you're not getting anything out of it. But the reality is, workers get so much out of it. Union representatives put their blood, sweat, and tears into making sure that we get fair contracts for our workers, that the pay is good, that if someone is laid off, they have the ability to come back and be one of the first recipients of a job with the same company. They do trainings. They keep people up to speed on changes in these industries. They protect the worker. And that was the whole goal to begin with. So my mom was a school teacher when she was younger, so she was part of the teachers union when I was growing up. And so they always made sure she was able to make fair wages. She was able to be paid a livable wage, so that when my dad was laid off and we were only a one-income household, my mom was able, because she had a livable wage, we could actually live on that wage. And it's because of unions that this happened. But the slow erosion of unions, the only people who have benefited from eroding unions are CEOs, are board members, are people that are raking in $30 million golden parachutes when they're forced to resign in disgrace. And of course, those people are going to hate unions, because unions tell them, no, that's not acceptable. If you can pay your guy $30 million, you can pay my guy $60,000 to do this job. And so that's why unions are so important. They protect our wages. They keep the income inequality gap down. They fight for the little guy. Somebody needs to do it, right? We need people to fight for our working class people, and unions are the hands down the best way to do it. And we're never going to rebuild the middle class unless we start giving rights and abilities to fight back to unions, and we stop stripping them away.
Excellent. Now, being a progressive, I also have many friends in our local progressive movement who are part of the LGBTQ community. And our LGBTQ citizens are often having to fight for mere survival, their rights to be protected at work, home, or even just going out in public with friends. What would be the first thing you would do to help our LGBTQ friends?
Amend Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to include things like sexual orientation and gender, gender identity, because as much good as the Civil Rights Act has done for us, we've come a long way between when the Civil Rights Act was put into effect versus today. So now we watch trans folks that are fighting just to be recognized as people, and that's abhorrent to me. I cannot believe that we still allow businesses to discriminate based on who someone is going to marry. That's unacceptable in the year 2017, and it's unacceptable in the nation that's supposed to offer freedom and liberty to all people. And I think the strongest and the best possible way that we can really help our LGBTQIA folks is by amending Title VI in the Civil Rights Act to make sure we're including gender identity and sexual orientation, because those deserve to be protected classes. Nobody should be able to tell you who you are or who you love.
Excellent. Now, although it is deceptively called Citizens United, Some would say a more appropriate name would be Major Corporations United. What is our best weapon against such deceptively titled legislation?
Wow, it is very deceptively titled legislation, and it makes me think of right to work, how it's not really right to work at all. It's right to be fired.
It's right to be subjugated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's not right to work. I've worked in a right to work state. It is not a right to work at all. They make
No.
it sound like it benefits the little guy, but it doesn't. And Citizens United is where they're doing the same thing. They're saying Citizens United. What they're not telling you is what they mean by citizens is corporations.
Yeah.
And we've falsely equated this idea that personhood can be applied to businesses. So businesses have as much say in our political process as people, which is just flatly not true. Government is supposed to be for, of, and by the people. It says we the people, not we the people incorporated. That is, it's unbelievable to me that we would allow corporations to infiltrate our democratic process the way that they have. But the best weapon that we've got, unless something comes to the Supreme Court to overturn Citizens United, which historically has happened for monumentous legislation, we need to start thinking about a Title V Convention of the States. So what that would allow us to do is that would allow us to amend the Constitution. It would allow us to add, I believe, the 28th Amendment, which would get big money out of politics and stop corporations from being able to essentially buy seats in Congress in order to get legislation passed that they want and not what people want. We have too many members of Congress that are bought and paid for by special interest groups, by lobbyists. I mean, the best example of this is the pharmaceutical industry, right? The pharmaceutical industry spends more money lobbying Congress than it does on CEO salaries. It spends more money convincing members of Congress to pass certain kinds of legislation or decline certain types of legislation than it does actually doing its job of doing pharmaceutical research. So the infiltration of corporate money in politics has been toxic to our system. It has slowly stripped away and eroded at the democratic process. But the best possible way that we can insulate ourselves, the best possible way that we can ensure that we're not one more Supreme Court case away from going back to Citizens United, even if something does get passed, Lord willing, that would overturn Citizens United, is to have our congressional representatives call for a Title V Convention of the States that would allow us to amend our Constitution and make sure that we kick big money out of politics for good.
Cool. So that new Republican tax plan, isn't it great?
Great is not exactly the word I would use, but it is a word that I'm sure someone has used. It's definitely not me. I like the GOP tax scam. I like calling it a tax scam, not a tax plan. 71% of Americans make $50,000 a year or less. And there was just a recent article this morning I shared about how a nonpartisan budget committee reviewed the tax plan and its potential effects. People making under $75,000 a year are going to see a tax hike. It is going to happen. But people making $1 million a year are going to see a tax break. And the most frustrating part is, by and large, both sides of the aisle at this point in our history now agree that trickle-down economics doesn't work. And one of the biggest flaws in this plan, other than the whole thing, is they're cutting the corporate business rate, the business tax rate, but they're not doing anything for small businesses. So big corporations are being slashed down to 20%, but small businesses are still paying, I think it's about 35% in corporate tax rates. They saw nothing. And I've been saying this forever. Whenever we cut corporate taxes, we're going to have to find that money somewhere else. And what happens is, instead of corporations paying it like they should while they're posting record profits based on the back of workers, they're not actually paying livable wages, is they foist that tax burden onto small businesses, which is partly why we've actually seen the biggest decline in new entrepreneurship and new business ownership in the history of our country right now, which a lot of people don't realize. We're actually seeing fewer small businesses and fewer startups than historically we ever have. And it's because we the people don't believe trickle-down economics works, but the people that have bought their way into Congress are still trying to sell us on that lie, and they're trying to make it look believable by continuously providing these cuts to corporations and to the top 1% of income earners that just don't need it. When you give people in the working class access to more money, so when you free up some of their funds, historically, throughout the entire time of human history, this has been a proven way to increase that they're going to spend it, right? So it's going to boost our economy. It's proven to increase their buying power. It's proven to increase their quality of life. It's proven to actually have a positive impact on the community. Whereas if you're giving a 10% tax cut to a guy with $1 billion, he doesn't care. That's nothing to him. That's a drop in the bucket. But a 10% tax cut to a guy making $50,000, that's life changing. And so the reality is this tax plan is just, it's cronyism. It's cronyism at its finest. It's thanks for getting me here. And then they give them a tax break, which is what they've been fighting for all along. They've been salivating over this tax plan. And it doesn't help the working people. It doesn't help the average American. It doesn't help me, I can tell you that. But because I work a job on top of this, and I certainly do not fall into the category of people that will be helped by this tax plan. It's a scam. That's exactly what it is. It's a scam. And even I have a lot of conservative friends, a lot of Republican friends, even they're expressing their outrage about it. They didn't want this tax plan. And this, I think, is something that it truly is a post-partisan subject. It's a cross-party subject. It's Republicans and Democrats actually agree this is a bad tax plan, but our representatives on the Republican side pushed it through. And I think that's just one more indicator that we need a change in Congress.
I don't know if you're probably familiar with Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. And he, one of the things that I've gotten out of his books is he's a real big supporter of, instead of trickle down economics, it's trickle up economics, because you know the working poor, even the working middle class, you know, if we got handed $10,000. If I got handed $10,000, what would I do with it? I would probably spend it on home improvement. I would probably spend it on paying off debt. I would probably spend it on maybe getting a more dependable car, you know, the better clothes for work, new pair of boots. You know, they tell us to, you know, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, you know, maybe we could afford some decent boots if it was trickle up economics as opposed to trickle down economics. So I think I'd really love it if I heard more progressives pushing the idea of trickle up economics as opposed to that trickle down, which, like you say, for decades, many of the people that voted all these great progressives into office, you know, they weren't even alive when Ronald Reagan was starting to push trickle-down economics. So we have entire generations that have lived their entire life. So how many decades are we going to give this a chance before we say, you know, maybe we've given it, you know, half a century. Maybe it's time to try the opposite and see how that works. So, but now you have said that you are passionate about healthcare for all United States citizens. What is the best way for us to pay for that?
So right now, we kind of already are. We're already all paying into Medicare right now, right? But then on top of that, because Medicare, when it was first initially proposed, was actually intended to be phased in as a universal healthcare system, but people forget about that. So we're already paying these taxes into Medicare. So we're already paying for the system. But then on top of that, we're also paying private insurance premiums. So the reality is it's kind of the way that the pricing system for Medicare for All works, or the way that the funding system for it is looking, is if instead of paying those premiums to private insurance companies, what if we cut them in half and we pay them all into a shared pool, kind of like how insurance companies already do? And we're already paying for Medicare, so we already have the pool, we just need to make it bigger. So that's kind of the whole goal behind it. But if we expand Medicare for All out to everybody, and then instead of paying premiums, we have people that are actually paying into this pool that we've already all been paying into, and now we're just putting more money into it, that's something that we can all take advantage of. And I mean, you look at what we're paying for now with our premiums, with the cost of healthcare, we're already paying for people who are uninsured. We're already bearing that burden of cost. We're already dealing with that. So what if instead of paying all that money to private insurance companies, we all put it into a shared system like Medicare for All, and we're paying for everybody, and we don't have to worry about insurance premium hikes. We can start haggling for drug prices. We can start haggling for costs of procedures and things like that, because it's already there. We just need to implement the system the way that it was supposed to be implemented. And, you know, instead of paying money to companies, pay money into this shared system.
Excellent. Now, liberals hate guns, and liberals all want to take everyone's guns away, right?
I hear that a lot. I lived in Arizona for about 5 years, and you can imagine how lonely life is living as a liberal in Arizona.
My best friend since 7th grade is a liberal living in Arizona right now.
So then you know a little bit about what it's like. You've heard stories, I'm sure. I've had to dissuade people from the gun myth for a long time. We don't want to take anybody's guns. No one wants to take anyone's guns. We believe firmly that the right to bear arms is not more important than our right to life. And I, as a steward of the Constitution or representative, I would be a steward of the Constitution. And the Second Amendment does exist. We do have a right to bear arms. We don't have a right to bear bump stocks. Assault weapons there was just a federal circuit court case that just ruled that assault weapons are not covered under the right to bear arms. And I agree with that. There's a way to have smart gun control without taking everyone's guns. So my father is from England, so he thinks that we should take everyone's guns. Yes, okay. So I guess there are some liberals that think we should take them. But I don't feel that way. I think people do have a right to bear arms, but we also have a right to life. And we have to make sure that we're not being so flippant and so loose with that right to bear arms that we're costing people their lives. And right now, with 2 mass shootings within 18 months of each other, and then we just had that school, another middle school that just shot up, we're being too flippant with the right to bear arms. And we're no longer prioritizing the right to life, which is guaranteed to us in the actual Constitution and not the Bill of Rights. So we need to make sure that we're implementing progressive gun legislation, that we're implementing the assault weapons ban, that we're actually having these background checks that we all keep talking about. We're actually implementing them. They're actually gun shops are actually required to go through these waiting periods and things like that. People can't just walk in and purchase 10 guns and 600 boxes of ammunition. That we're keeping track of. If we don't want to keep track of the firearms, let's keep track of the ammunition. We need to make sure that we're not allowing people to just buy bump stocks and turn these weapons into assault weapons. There's no need for a silencer for an automatic rifle. There's no need for fully automatic weapons. These are not home defense weapons. These are wartime weapons, and we need to make sure that we're making the firm differentiation between home defense and hunting versus wartime weaponry, because we have to do something. We can't just sit on our hands and do nothing and offer thoughts and prayers every time some people get shot up. We have to actually take action. And there was a representative I think he's out of Massachusetts. I can't remember his name, but he was the guy that said he refuses to offer thoughts and prayers. And then he's had a sit-in in Congress, I think 2 years ago. And that's the kind of thing we need to see. That's the kind of thing we need to see from real progressives. We need to see them willing to be uncomfortable and host things like sit-ins and demand change, because thoughts and prayers aren't going to change anything. Action will. And we're all tired of thoughts and prayers. We want action. People need action. Most Americans agree with progressive gun legislation. So now is the time to act, because that's what the people want.
I agree. Now, net neutrality. I'm a geek. Otherwise, this interview probably wouldn't be possible. So I am a geek, and I am very passionate about the subject of net neutrality. Maybe a lot of people watching this don't know what net neutrality is and why it's so important. So they're probably wondering, doesn't that just make our precious Netflix cheaper?
I too am a huge geek. I spent many years playing World of Warcraft, playing Rift, played some Counter-Strike in my day. I've played a lot. I'm a big video game fan, big nerd. We also are all streaming. We don't have any cable news or any cable television or anything. We're all streaming services. So the internet is a big deal to us. We're a very plugged in family in my house. Basically what net neutrality, the removal of net neutrality would do is it would say, okay, you want social media, then you have to buy our social media package. Okay, you want Netflix, and you have to buy our Netflix package. Okay, you want Hulu and Netflix, you have to buy our bundle. So you're basically not buying the internet, you're buying web pages. And I think for companies to do that is just to completely grossly misunderstand what the platform for modern free speech is. And this is an issue of freedom of information. This is an issue of how we trade ideas. This is an issue of how we invent, how we innovate, how we talk to each other, how we communicate. The internet is the 21st century free speech forum. And that's the reality of it. And for companies to be able to pick and choose who can have access to what speech and who can have access to what platforms, that's an absolute infringement on that speech. And we need to make sure that we're keeping the internet neutral. The only time you see any kind of control over the internet, over certain web pages and certain corners of the internet, is in places like China, in places where they have severe restrictions on it, North Korea, in all these countries where they don't want you to see certain things. That's what they do. They fully control and regulate the internet. And the difference is, instead of our government being the ones who are overtly just coming out and saying, yeah, it's actually us, we're doing this, they're passing that buck over to corporations, letting corporations do it. And if you ask me, that's almost more sinister, because now people are profiting off of our inability to communicate freely with one another. But I mean, to me, this is bigger than just a question of free information and a question of the internet. Can I still stream, right? Can I still stream Hulu? Can I still watch Future Man? This is about freedom of speech, our freedom of ability to talk to people across the country. I want to, as a person in Washington, I should be freely able to engage in a discussion with someone in Florida on whatever topic we so choose, and no company should have the right to tell me whether I can and cannot have that discussion on that forum.
Now, with the goal of having the viewer, the person viewing this or listening to this interview, understand what net neutrality is, there's also a risk of, if you have one of our geek friends write a great new app for social networking, for maybe have their own independent, for independent filmmakers or something. And so they make their own little small independent Netflix, Hulu kind of thing. They do their own version of Facebook that maybe cares more about your privacy. The reality is with net neutrality, the ISP can sit there and say, okay, who's the highest bidder? Okay, well, Facebook, you're the highest bidder, so we're going to allow more bits to you, and we're going to totally what's called packet shaping. Basically, they kind of turn the pipe a little lower for the small independent company that's maybe offering you more privacy and allowing Facebook, for example, to have much more bandwidth, much more bits. And so you basically end up the independent site or the next new thing is then held back and has less of a chance of success because they don't have as much bandwidth, because the ISP got paid more money by their competitor, and so the current king stays the king and is then able to control you and subjugate you as a user. Because what are you going to do? Go to the guy whose website you can barely get to? So that's I don't know. I felt I needed to explain a little bit more and hopefully leave people more educated about because net neutrality is something I think the grand majority of people, even most progressives, aren't aware of. So
yeah, it's such a colossal, it's such a big deal. It's such a colossal subject that I think it doesn't get as much weight as it really should, especially with how important the internet is now, right?
Yeah.
To the modern era in the 21st century, the internet is so important. That's why I mentioned things like innovation, because I mean, and then you run into the risk of if you create something on someone else's website, then do companies have the right to then own that? Is it like when you're at work and create something, does your company own it? And it opens up the floodgates to so many complicated questions and so many big questions that I don't have faith in our Congress right now, as they are bought and paid for, to answer the right way. And keeping it neutral, it ensures that that's never questioned, that never comes into play, that never is a discussion. People can freely access whatever information they want, however they want. They can innovate, they can invent, they can talk, they can do whatever they need to do without fear of repercussion or without fear of being throttled or anything like that. And we already are very frustrated at our internet companies, and it's just going to make it worse. So if anything, be really against net neutrality, because the amount of time you want to spend on customer service needs to go down. Like, that's really, if that's your only thing, fine, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Just be upset about net neutrality.
Well, and my thought is that if you're in the business of selling bits, sell bits. You can't tell me how I'm going to use those bits, how I'm going to send bits out, how I'm going to take bits in. Bits are bits, and sell me the bits, and then take my money and just give me the bits, and that's all it is. So I have one more question. And then I'm gonna close it out with you plugging whatever you need to plug, because that's a very important part about this, where people go for information. But before that, I have the most important question to me personally, and this is where my agenda becomes very clear.
Okay.
As a high school custodian, I know that Washington State schools are falling more and more behind on what they spend on custodial and maintenance. Classrooms are not getting cleaned to the level they should. HVAC systems are failing in the middle of winter. Workers are being pushed until they get sick or injured and are often not able to serve the students and the teachers and the community as well as they would like. We want to be able to work our living tails off and walk away proud of the job that we've done. Although you're not in my area, can I get a promise from you that you will look deeply into custodial and maintenance coverage in your schools and make sure that these people are not working their tails off with absolutely no chance of being proud of the work that they've been able to do?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely. I work with a gentleman who actually is also a former custodian for one of the school districts in this area. And we've had long conversations. He's now a really good friend of mine, but I mean, you guys work so hard, and people don't ever stop to think about it. And schools are underfunded on such a colossal level that people don't think about the effect that it has on things like custodial and maintenance work. And I mean, you want to talk about keeping classrooms clean, you want to talk about keeping gyms organized, things like that. That's custodians that come in and do that. And without schools having access to the funding they need to pay people, it's a lot harder to get the resources you guys need as well as teachers, because funding schools is really important to me. Education is incredibly important to me, but education is an all-encompassing topic, and it talks not just about the actual education of our students, but the facilities in which they're educated. And by what we've done is we've constantly treated schools and education like they're a piggy bank, and we can just take money from them whenever we want. We can just move money from education, and that has a negative effect on people, from students to custodial workers to teachers. It has a negative impact on everybody. And so you absolutely can have a promise from me that I will definitely do more research into the custodial workers and what custodians are doing around schools, maintenance workers, and how important that is, because I know that's important. But as an all-encompassing promise, I promise to fight for educational facilities to get the funding they need based off of equity, not on who pays more money in property taxes in the areas, because that's what we need, and that's one of the solutions that I'm going to fight for and push for. But you absolutely have my word that that's something I'm going to look into.
Excellent. So now the final question is, where can people find you? Where do people support you? What websites, social media accounts can people find you and interact with you on?
Awesome. So you can find me in a couple places. I try to be everywhere. You can at least find me. VoteSarahSmith.com is my website. It's Sarah with an H, so it's VoteSarahSmith.com. I'm, again, all grassroots. I'm all individual donations. I don't take special interest money. I don't take corporate money. I don't have any involvement with any super PACs or anything like that. I am funded by, of, and for the people. And if you want to donate to my campaign, our average donation is actually $27. And I was elated this morning when I saw that. It made me really happy. But if you want to donate to our campaign, VoteSarahSmith.com/donate. I'm also on Twitter at SarahSmith2018. I'm on Facebook, SarahSmithWA09, and I'm actually on Instagram as well, SarahSmithWA09 as well there. So I'm pretty much all over the place. We're working on a YouTube channel right now. It's SarahSmith2018, YouTube.com/SarahSmith2018. I think there's users in there, but if you look for us on YouTube, we're up there. I'm pretty much everywhere. So VoteSarahSmith.com is where you can find all of our volunteer opportunities, links to all our social media. So if you ever don't remember or can't remember the URL or anything, just go to VoteSarahSmith.com, and that's where you can find everything about me.
Okay, and we will definitely include those links in the little text, the show notes that go along with this video in the places we upload it. And in closing, I just wanted to say I'm stealing this from a fellow progressive friend of mine. I don't think he'll mind, but I noticed that you had a Star Wars poster in the background in one of your videos. So I want to bring up the idea that, and I'm really going to push this idea. We are the rebels.
Yes, we are. I love that.
Yeah. So if you see a Star Wars Star Wars logo around the Next Step Rising website or Facebook, the reason is because we are the rebels. So I'm going to now. You are the first interview where I'm going to use my new slogan.
Whoa.
So here we
okay,
go.
I'm ready.
Ready? Your biggest protest is your vote.
Yes, vote yes. I love that.
So
use that all the time.
Yes, this is our new slogan for nextsteprising.com. Your biggest protest is your vote. I love that people are protesting. Your biggest protest is your vote. So thank you very much for speaking with me today and answering all the questions. I know it was a long interview, but we want to keep people informed, and hopefully they can watch this in a form where they can lay back and relax and watch this interview, this long form media. So thank you very much for speaking with me today, and good luck.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. You have a good rest of your night.
All right.